The ruins lay half-buried under the ochre sands of Viridian Delta, their spires clawing skyward like skeletal fingers. Ellie Vance, archaeologist and thrill-seeker, adjusted her oxygen mask as her boots crunched against shards of glassy obsidian. The place had an unshakable aura, an ancient civilization's last, desperate cry frozen in time. Beside her, Takara moved with feline grace, her violet-hued skin shimmering faintly in the light of Viridian's twin suns. The alien scout's eyes, large and liquid, scanned their surroundings with an intensity that made Ellie uneasy. Takara's species, the Licorans, were famed for their telepathic prowess, but Ellie had quickly learned their abilities extended far beyond mind-reading. "This place hums," Takara murmured, her voice smooth but tinged with tension. "The echoes of 1,000 lives linger here. Their pain is thick." Ellie suppressed a shiver. "Yeah, well, let's hope the artifacts we're looking for are worth it. The museum back on Terra Alpha is paying a fortune for anything from the Rylothian age." Takara didn't reply. Instead, she knelt by an ancient pillar etched with glowing glyphs that pulsed faintly, as if stirred by her touch. "They're still active?" Ellie asked, crouching beside her. Takara nodded. "This place is alive in ways we do not fully understand. Be cautious, Ellie." Ellie smirked. "Caution's never been my strong suit." Hours passed as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, their progress marked by eerie silence and the occasional skittering of unseen creatures. Ellie found herself growing more uneasy. Every step deeper into the ruins felt like peeling back layers of something forbidden. Finally, they entered a cavernous chamber. At its center stood a monolithic pedestal, atop which rested a small, black cube pulsating with an inner light. It was unlike any artifact Ellie had ever seen. "That's it," Ellie breathed. "The shadow cube of Ryloth." The record said it held the key to their downfall. Takara hesitated. "We should not touch it. The Rylothians were masters of psychic traps. Their artifacts are not meant for mortal hands." Ellie ignored her. She pulled a scanning device from her belt and took a cautious step forward. The moment she breached the perimeter of the pedestal, the room came alive. Glyphs blazed to life along the walls, spiraling and shifting. A low hum filled the air, growing into a deafening roar. "Takara, what's happening?" Ellie shouted. "I warned you." Takara hissed, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light as she extended her hands, trying to shield them both psychically. But it was too late. Ellie stumbled back as the floor beneath the pedestal collapsed, revealing a swirling void of dark energy. Out of it erupted tendrils of black light, snapping and writhing like the limbs of some ancient predator. Takara, in her panic, stepped onto a pressure plate. A deafening click echoed through the chamber. Above them, a network of jagged obsidian spears shot out from the walls, descending toward them with lethal precision. Without thinking, Ellie threw herself at Takara, tackling the alien to the ground just as the first spear shattered against her backplate. She screamed as pain lanced through her, but she forced herself to roll away, shielding Takara with her body as more spears rained down. "Ellie." Takara's voice was a mixture of horror and disbelief. Ellie gritted her teeth, her vision swimming. "I've had worse days." The spears finally stopped, retracting back into the walls, leaving Ellie sprawled on the cold stone floor. Blood seeped from a deep gash in her shoulder, but she managed a weak smile. Takara knelt over her, trembling. Why would you do that? My kind does not understand such selflessness." Ellie chuckled, though it hurt. "Guess humans are weird like that. Besides, what good's a partner if you let them get skewered?" Takara's hands hovered over Ellie's wound. A faint warmth spread through her body as the alien's telekinetic abilities slowed the bleeding. "You are reckless, Ellie Vance," Takara said softly, "and extraordinary." Despite the pain, Ellie found herself grinning. "I get that a lot." As Takara helped her to her feet, a new sound filled the chamber. A low, resonant hum emanating from the shadow cube. It floated off its pedestal, its dark tendrils writhing with newfound purpose. "It knows we are here," Takara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's awake." The cube began to pulse rhythmically, each flash of light accompanied by a wave of psychic pressure that made Ellie's head throb. She stumbled, clutching her temples. "They're trying to communicate," Takara said, her voice strained. "The Rylothians' final memories, they're in the cube. It's broadcasting their last moments." Ellie gritted her teeth. "Can you block it?" Takara shook her head. "Not entirely, but I can try to filter it." She placed her hands on Ellie's temples, and the mental noise faded, replaced by coherent images flooding Ellie's mind. She saw the Rylothians, a once proud race with technology so advanced it bordered on magic. They had sought to harness the energies of the void, only to unleash a power they could not control. Their cities fell, their people consumed, and in their desperation, they had sealed their knowledge in the Shadow Cube, hoping someone would learn from their mistakes. Ellie staggered back as the visions ended. They destroyed themselves. Takara nodded solemnly. "And now the cube is testing us. It wants to know if we are worthy of its secrets or doomed to repeat their folly." As they stared at the cube, the chamber began to shift, the walls melting into a vast, star-strewn void. They were no longer in the ruins, but a projection of the cube's memories. A voice echoed in their minds, ancient and sorrowful. "Prove yourselves or perish as we did. What does it want?" Ellie asked, gripping her side. "To face our deepest fears," Takara replied, her voice shaking, "and to overcome them." Suddenly, the void around them solidified, transforming into a battlefield. Ellie was surrounded by phantoms of her past, people she had failed to save on past expeditions. Their accusing eyes bore into her, their voices demanding answers. Takara, meanwhile, was confronted by the specters of her own kind, their minds united in a chorus of scorn. "You betrayed us, Takara. You abandoned the Lycaran way." The cube pulsed, its tendrils tightening around them. Ellie and Takara exchanged a look. Whatever the test was, they would face it together. The battlefield dissolved like smoke in the wind, and Ellie and Takara were plunged into an endless labyrinth. Walls of obsidian glass towered above them, reflecting distorted versions of themselves in flickering flashes. The cube hovered in the air, its pulsating light casting eerie shadows that twisted and writhed as if alive. "This isn't just a test," Takara said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "It's trying to break us." Ellie clenched her fists, wincing as her shoulder throbbed. "We've faced worse. Let's figure this out and get the hell out of here." The air was thick with an unnatural tension. Every step they took was accompanied by faint whispers, indistinct but persistent. Ellie couldn't tell if they came from the walls or the depths of her own mind. Takara pressed her fingers against one of the walls, her glowing eyes narrowing in concentration. "The labyrinth isn't real. It's a construct of the cube's energy, but it's powerful enough to deceive our senses." Ellie frowned. "So we're trapped in a glorified hallucination?" "In a sense," Takara replied, turning sharply as a corridor shifted behind them. "But it can still hurt us." Ellie's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, even though she doubted bullets would help. "Any ideas on how we get out?" Takara hesitated. "We need to align our minds. The cube thrives on discord. If we can synchronize our thoughts, it may reveal the path." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You want me to mind meld with a telepathic alien while we're stuck in a haunted Rubik's Cube? Sounds perfectly reasonable." Takara's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Trust is the key, Ellie. Without it, we will fail." Before Ellie could respond, the labyrinth shifted again, the floor dropping out from beneath them. They fell into a new chamber, its walls etched with pulsating glyphs. The air here was colder, biting against Ellie's skin. The whispers grew louder, resolving into distinct voices. One of them was hauntingly familiar. "Ellie, you left me." She spun around, her heart plummeting. A figure stood in the shadows, a man with piercing blue eyes and a scar that bisected his cheek. "Reynolds?" Ellie's voice wavered. "No, you're not real." Reynolds stepped closer, his eyes filled with accusation. "You abandoned me on Carthy's Prime. Left me to die while you chased glory." Ellie's breath hitched. Memories surged forward. An expedition gone wrong, a collapsing cavern, and her desperate decision to save the artifact over her partner. It wasn't like that, she whispered. I didn't have a choice. The figure of Reynolds ignored her protest, his form shimmering as it morphed into something grotesque. Dark tendrils sprouted from his back, and his voice deepened into a guttural growl. You will pay for your betrayal. Meanwhile, Takara was frozen in place, her own nightmare playing out before her. A Lycaran elder materialized in front of her, draped in ceremonial robes. His voice was cold and sharp as glass. You defied our code, Takara. You walked among the lesser races, sullying our purity. You are an exile, a disgrace to the Lycaran way. Takara's hands trembled, her usually serene expression contorted with anguish. I sought understanding, unity. The council was wrong to isolate us. You doomed us all, the elder hissed, his form splintering into countless fragments that swirled around her like a storm. The shadows around them grew thicker, pressing in from all sides. Ellie gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. Takara, we have to break free. Takara blinked, her eyes locking with Ellie's. We must synchronize, she said, her voice shaking. Push past the illusions. Ellie reached out, grabbing Takara's hand. The moment their fingers touched, a surge of energy coursed through them. The shadows recoiled, the whispers silenced. A blinding light engulfed them, and the labyrinth dissolved. They found themselves standing in a vast, featureless void. The cube hovered before them, its tendrils now subdued, curling and unfurling like the petals of a dark flower. You have endured the trial, the ancient voice intoned, resonating through the void. But your journey is not yet complete. Ellie glared at the cube, her patience wearing thin. We've faced your traps and your nightmares. What more do you want? The cube pulsed. Knowledge is earned, not given. You seek the secrets of the Rylothians, but can you bear their weight? Ellie and Takara exchanged a glance. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they stepped forward together. The cube emitted a final pulse, and their surroundings shifted once more. They were no longer in the void but standing amidst a city of impossible beauty. Towers of crystalline light rose into the sky, and shimmering pathways wove between them like rivers of starlight. This was Ryloth, Takara whispered, her voice tinged with awe. Before the fall, the voice of the cube spoke again, softer now. Behold the pinnacle of our achievement and the harbinger of our doom. As they watched, the sky above the city darkened, and a massive rift tore through the heavens. From it poured an endless tide of darkness, consuming everything in its path. The Rylothians fought valiantly, their advanced technology unleashing devastating energy blasts, but it was futile. The city fell, and with it, the entire civilization. Ellie's stomach churned as the vision faded. They unleashed the void, and it destroyed them. Takara's expression was grim. And now the cube asks us if we will repeat their mistakes. The cube's tendrils extended toward them, glowing faintly. The knowledge of the void can grant great power, but at great cost. Will you take it, knowing the risk? Ellie looked at Takara, her mind racing. Could they trust themselves with such power? Could anyone? Ellie hesitated, the tendrils of the cube hovering inches from her chest. The artifact pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, as if urging her to decide. Its ancient power hummed in the air, an intoxicating blend of promise and peril. I don't like this, Ellie muttered, glancing at Takara. How do we know this isn't another test? Another mind game? Takara's violet eyes studied the cube intently, her expression unreadable. It may be both. The Rylothians didn't understand the void's power, but they sought to control it. The cube knows that to pass its trial, we must confront not just the danger, but ourselves. Ellie frowned. That's cryptic, even for you. Takara placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder. The question isn't whether we can wield this knowledge. It's whether we should. Ellie exhaled sharply. Her mind flashed back to Reynolds' accusing face in the illusion. How many times had she pushed the limits, valuing discovery over safety? How many people had paid the price? But what if this was their chance to make a difference? What if this knowledge could save lives, or entire civilizations? We take it, Ellie said finally, her voice steady, but we take it together. If we're going to carry this weight, We need to make sure we don't let it break us. Takara nodded solemnly. Together, then. The cube's tendrils split into two, one reaching for Ellie, the other for Takara. As they made contact, an explosion of light enveloped them. Ellie felt her mind stretch and expand, her consciousness brushing against Takara's in ways she hadn't thought possible. They were no longer two individuals, but two halves of a shared experience. The cube flooded their minds with knowledge, images, equations, and alien concepts that defied human and Lycaran understanding. Ellie saw the Rylothians in their prime, harnessing the energy of the void to power their cities, cure diseases, and transcend physical limitations. She felt their triumph and their arrogance. They had believed themselves invincible, blind to the creeping darkness that consumed them. Takara, meanwhile, felt the weight of responsibility. The Rylothians had known the void's power could corrupt, but they had pressed on, driven by ambition. Their failure was not just in unleashing the void, but in believing they were immune to its influence. The cube's voice returned, quieter now, almost mournful. You are bound together, as we once were. Will you be stronger than we were, or will you fall as we did? Ellie and Takara felt the cube's tendrils withdraw, leaving them standing in the chamber once more. But something had changed. The cube no longer pulsed with energy. Its once vibrant light was dim. It's dormant, Ellie said, touching its surface. Takara nodded. The knowledge has passed to us. The cube has served its purpose. As the ruins shifted around them, Ellie and Takara found themselves in the central chamber again. The once threatening glyphs were now faint, their energy spent. Ellie turned to Takara, her brow furrowed. What now? We have the knowledge, but what do we do with it? If this gets into the wrong hands? Takara's expression darkened. The void's power is dangerous, even in capable hands. We must ensure it is never used recklessly. That begins with us. Ellie sighed. Great. Another impossible responsibility. Just what I needed. Takara offered a rare smile. You're not alone, Ellie. We faced this together. The chamber began to tremble, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. Ellie glanced around. I think we overstayed our welcome. Let's get out of here before this place buries us. The journey back through the ruins was harrowing. The labyrinthine corridors were collapsing, ancient mechanisms finally giving way after centuries of decay. Ellie and Takara ran side by side, their steps in perfect sync. As they neared the exit, a final obstacle emerged. A massive chasm that had opened in the floor, its edges crumbling further with each passing second. Can you make the jump? Ellie shouted, gauging the distance. Takara scanned the gap, her telepathic abilities assessing its stability. It's risky, but we have no choice. Ellie nodded, gripping Takara's hand tightly. On three. They leaped together, adrenaline surging as the chasm yawned beneath them. Takara used a burst of telekinetic energy to propel them forward, and they landed on the other side in a heap. Ellie groaned, rolling onto her back. I hate ruins. Remind me to retire after this. Takara smirked. Somehow, I doubt you will. The ruins shuddered one final time before collapsing entirely, a plume of dust and debris rising into the sky. Ellie and Takara watched in silence, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a storm cloud. Back at their ship, Ellie patched up her wounds while Takara reviewed the data they had gathered. The knowledge from the cube lingered in their minds, a constant presence that neither of them fully understood. We can't take this back to Terra Alpha, Ellie said finally. If the wrong people find out about this, Takara nodded. Agreed. The knowledge is too dangerous, but we can't destroy it either. It may hold the key to protecting our worlds from future threats. Ellie sighed, leaning back in her chair. So we keep it secret, study it, learn from it, on our terms. Takara met her gaze. And we trust each other to keep that secret. Ellie extended her hand, and Takara clasped it firmly. In that moment, they were no longer just allies. They were partners bound by a shared burden. As the ship lifted off, Ellie glanced out the viewport at the ruins disappearing into the distance. The ancient secrets of the Rylothians were now theirs to bear. But the shadows of the void lingered, and Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. For weeks, the journey back to neutral space was fraught with tension. Though the ruins were behind them, Ellie and Takara both sensed the lingering presence of the void's influence. At times, Ellie would wake from restless dreams, her heart pounding, only to find the ship's systems registering energy spikes emanating from the sealed containment unit that housed the dormant cube. Takara was no less affected. She often sat in quiet meditation, her mind locked in battle with the remnants of the cube's psychic imprint. On more than one occasion, she confessed to hearing faint whispers, ghostly echoes of the Rylothian civilization. "It doesn't feel like it's entirely asleep," Takara admitted one evening, her violet eyes distant. "The knowledge we gained, it's alive, Ellie. It's watching us." Ellie set down her mug of synthebrew, leaning back in her chair. "You think it's testing us even now?" Takara nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's something worse." Ellie gave a bitter laugh. "Great. As if being hunted by rogue mercenaries and competing treasure hunters wasn't bad enough. Now we've got an ancient, sentient artifact playing head games with us." Takara didn't laugh. It was during the ship's fourth hyperspace jump that the first sign of trouble appeared. Ellie was running diagnostics on the ship's navigation systems when a string of unfamiliar glyphs scrolled across the screen, glowing faintly with the same eerie energy as the cube's glyphs. "Takara?" Ellie called, her voice sharp. The Licaran appeared moments later, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" Ellie pointed to the console. "These symbols, they weren't here a second ago." Takara's eyes widened. "They're Rylothian. The cube is trying to communicate." Ellie frowned, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Why now? What does it want?" Before Takara could answer, the ship's lights dimmed, and a low hum reverberated through the hull. The containment unit housing the cube emitted a faint glow, casting flickering shadows across the room. "It's waking up," Takara said, her voice barely a whisper. Ellie grabbed her sidearm. "Waking up doesn't sound good. Can you figure out what it's trying to say?" Takara nodded, placing her hands on the console. Her eyes glowed faintly as she extended her telepathic senses, attempting to interface with the cube's message. Suddenly, she recoiled, gasping. "It's not a message, it's a warning." Ellie's stomach sank. "A warning about what?" "The void," Takara said, her voice trembling. "Something is coming." The warning proved prophetic. Barely an hour later, the ship's sensors detected an unidentified vessel trailing them. The sleek, angular design was unmistakable, a Voidseer-class cruiser, known for its stealth capabilities and used by the enigmatic Hunters of Aegis, an interstellar faction rumored to be obsessed with collecting dangerous artifacts. "They must have tracked us from Viridian Delta," Ellie muttered, her hands flying over the ship's controls as she plotted evasive maneuvers. Takara glanced out the viewport, her face grim. "The hunters don't track. They stalk. They'll have anticipated every move we make." Ellie cursed under her breath. "So what do we do? Fight? Hide?" Takara hesitated, then shook her head. "Neither. They're here for the cube. We need to outthink them." The ship shuddered as a warning siren blared. A crackling voice came through the comms, deep and distorted. "Relinquish the artifact, and you may yet live." Ellie snorted. "I hate it when they say may." Ignoring the threat, she pushed the ship into a sharp dive, skimming the surface of a nearby asteroid belt. Chunks of rock zipped past the viewport as Ellie executed daring maneuvers, trying to shake their pursuer. The Voidseer cruiser was relentless, matching their every move. Its sleek hull gleamed ominously, its weapon systems lighting up like a predator baring its teeth. Takara's hands gripped the edge of her seat. "Ellie, if they capture us, they'll take the cube, and they'll use its power to unleash chaos." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Not on my watch." The chase continued, each maneuver growing more desperate as the hunters closed the distance. Ellie's fingers danced over the controls, sweat dripping down her temple. "We're not going to make it at this rate," Takara said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Ellie grinned tightly. "Oh, we're making it. We just need to level the playing field." She punched a series of commands into the console, redirecting power from non-essential systems to the ship's engines and shields. Then, she activated a manual override on the cube's containment unit. "Ellie, What are you doing? Takara demanded, her eyes widening, giving them something to think about. The cube flared to life as the containment field dropped. Its dark tendrils extended, crackling with energy. Ellie gritted her teeth against the surge of psychic pressure that filled the cabin. The hunter's ship faltered, its trajectory wavering as the cube's energy lashed out, disrupting its systems. The pursuing vessel spun wildly, its sleek form colliding with a nearby asteroid in a fiery explosion. Ellie slumped back in her seat, breathing heavily. Well, that worked. Takara didn't share her relief. She stared at the cube, its energy still pulsing ominously. You unleashed its power, Ellie. That may have saved us, but it could have awakened something far worse. Ellie frowned, her gaze shifting to the artifact. Yeah, well, one problem at a time. The ship was quiet as they drifted through the void, but the sense of unease lingered. The cube's tendrils had receded, but its surface continued to pulse faintly, as if alive. Takara broke the silence. The hunters won't be the last. The cube's energy has been unleashed. It will draw others. Ellie nodded, staring at the stars. Then we find a way to end this. For good. But even as she spoke, the whispers returned, faint but insistent. The cube was no longer dormant, and somewhere in the endless depths of space, the void stirred. Days turned into weeks as Ellie and Takara traveled deeper into uncharted space, seeking a place where the cube's influence could no longer reach the civilizations of the galaxy. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling their dreams and waking moments with fragments of alien knowledge and cryptic warnings. Takara spent long hours meditating, her psychic abilities working overtime to contain the cube's growing power. Ellie focused on keeping the ship running and their path hidden from prying eyes. But both knew they were running out of time. It's unstable, Takara said one evening, sitting across from Ellie in the ship's cramped galley. Her face was pale, her usually sharp eyes dulled with exhaustion. The cube's energy is growing. If we don't act soon, it will consume us and anyone who comes near it. Ellie nodded grimly. So what do we do? Destroy it? Bury it? Takara shook her head. Neither. The cube is bound to the void. To stop it, we must return it to where it came from. Ellie frowned. You mean throw it back into the void? Takara hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but the void is not just a place. It's a dimensional rift. Entering it is irreversible. Ellie's heart sank. You mean we won't come back? Takara didn't reply. They charted a course to the edge of the galaxy, where the void's rift was said to pulse like a wound in space. The journey was perilous, their ship battered by gravitational anomalies and waves of destabilizing energy. Finally, they reached the rift. It was a swirling vortex of darkness, a vast, yawning chasm that seemed to devour the light of nearby stars. The cube reacted instantly, its tendrils writhing and its glow intensifying. This is it, Takara said, her voice steady despite the dread etched into her features. The cube must be returned here, or its power will spread unchecked. Ellie glanced at the controls, then at her friend. We could set the ship on autopilot, launch the cube into the rift, and make a run for it. Takara shook her head. The cube is sentient. It won't allow itself to be discarded so easily. Someone has to guide it into the void and hold it there. Ellie's stomach twisted. You're saying one of us has to go in with it? Takara nodded. Ellie opened her mouth to argue, but Takara stopped her with a look. You've already sacrificed so much, Ellie. You've saved me more times than I can count. Let me do this. No, Ellie said firmly. We do this together. If the cube needs both of us to carry its weight, then we both go. Takara's expression softened. You are as reckless as you are brave, Ellie Vance. Ellie grinned despite the gravity of the moment. Takes one to know one. With the ship locked on a collision course with the void, Ellie and Takara prepared for the final act. They stood side by side in the cargo hold, the cube floating ominously between them. Its energy crackled, sensing its imminent return to the abyss. Ready? Ellie asked, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Takara reached out, placing her hand on Ellie's shoulder. I'm honored to have shared this journey with you. Ellie swallowed hard. Same here. Let's make it count. The ship shuddered violently as it approached the rift. The cube's energy surged, enveloping them in a blinding light. Ellie felt the pull of the void, a force unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was cold and infinite, a weightless emptiness that pressed against her mind. Together, she and Takara guided the cube into the heart of the rift. Its tendrils flailed, resisting until the very last moment. Then, with a final pulse of energy, it vanished into the abyss. The void closed around them, its darkness absolute. Ellie felt Takara's presence beside her, their bond unbroken even as the physical world dissolved. For a brief, transcendent moment, they were one with the void, an infinite expanse of possibilities and endings. And then there was silence. The ship's emergency beacon was discovered years later, adrift on the fringes of known space. Salvagers retrieved fragments of its logs, piecing together the story of Ellie Vance and Takara, the archaeologist and the telepath who sacrificed everything to prevent a cosmic disaster. The cube was never seen again, but in the minds of those who heard the tale, a warning lingered. Some knowledge is not meant to be possessed, and some sacrifices echo across eternity.